Welcome to Good Faith Reads. I'm your host, Cally Chisholm, Creative Coordinator at Good Faith Media. Good Faith Reads is a short podcast released twice a month in which we focus on one of our book authors at Good Faith Media. We've published more than 100 titles under our Nurturing Faith book imprint, and we invite you to check them out at goodfaithmedia.org/bookstore. Today's guests are Maralene and Miles Wesner, authors of If Jesus Were Here Today. Welcome back to the podcast.
I've spent my life considering the question, what if Jesus' time on earth had been in our century here in America? I love to discuss the possibilities that would bring.
You may be familiar with those WWJD bracelets that once were all the rage. Does your book attempt to answer the age-old question, what would Jesus do? Could you describe the concept of the book for our listeners today?
This book is based on 19 incidents in his life that we feel could be analogies to situations that he might face if he were here today. For instance, when we see what he did then, we can say, then this is probably what he would do now.
So where did you two get the inspiration for this book?
In order for Jesus to become real to us, we must get him out of white robes and take him off the donkey. And let him live in the context of our modern culture. Obsolete terms and conditions blunt the impact of the gospel. If our lives are to be affected, we must bring the message of Jesus into this century. We must discover what Jesus would say and do if he lived here now, instead of in Palestine years ago. We've always emphasized a Jesus gospel, and you have to know his interests and values and beliefs in order to be a disciple.
When I studied Jesus' witnessing methods, I think it's significant that he didn't present a salvation formula. Instead, he dealt with people individually and responded to each one's specific needs.
We'll be right back with more Good Faith Reads.
Hi, I'm Tyler Tankersley, Senior Pastor of Ardmore Baptist Church, and we invite you to join us for our newest podcast called Speaking in Parables, where we explore the stories that Jesus told and how to apply them to our lives today. You can find more information at ardmorebaptist.org/speakinginparables.
Welcome back to Good Faith Reads. Today we're joined remotely by Maralene and Miles Wesner, authors of the Good Faith Media book, If Jesus Were Here Today. In Chapter 3, you write about Jesus surrounding himself with a diverse group of followers and that he advocated for social changes despite rejection from the educated religious community. How do you think Jesus would respond to the social challenges of today? Would he be rejected by Christians for his unique outlook?
I'm convinced that because of his emphasis on racial equality and his liberal tendencies, that most churches today would not accept him. The use of our New Testament words has given us a false complacency. Because, if he were here today, he wouldn't tell a story about a good Samaritan. That doesn't mean anything to people. Instead, he would use whatever or whoever is being persecuted by society at the time. For instance, 50 or 60 years ago, he'd probably said a black man came along and helped him. After 9/11, he'd probably said a Muslim came along and helped him. Today, use your imagination. He might use a transgender or a homosexual. That wouldn't be popular. Also, he was ruthless in his criticism of Pharisees, calling them snakes.
Yeah.
But today, he wouldn't criticize Pharisees. Instead, he'd probably attack mega church pastors and televangelists who live in luxury on donations they receive from poor people. He'd probably condemn church-going community leaders who cheat in their businesses. That wouldn't be popular. Then very fundamentalist preachers who are trying to dictate the role of women in ministry wouldn't like the way he handled Martha when she criticized Mary for neglecting her place in the kitchen. That wouldn't be popular.
I was going to say I'm disturbed that many ministers today tend to interpret the gospel from Paul's perspective rather than from Jesus' perspective.
An important note to all of our listeners. We at Good Faith Media are always accepting book proposals. Our authors engage with an experienced team of editors, designers, and marketers to produce and sell books on a variety of topics. If you have a book proposal you'd like to run by us, head on over to goodfaithmedia.org/bookstore for more information. I wonder if one of you might read for us a short passage from the book that you think is critical for listeners to hear.
It's difficult to know the mind and follow the example of a person who lived so long ago, but the Gospels do include some frequently overlooked vignettes that teach us about Jesus' personal character and values. They can help us determine what Jesus would say and do about current issues. Jesus was an extremely practical individual. For instance, when John the Baptist questioned him about his identity and position of authority, he didn't quote scriptural prophecy. He didn't present complicated theological arguments. He didn't even react with an emotional defense. Instead, he simply instructed him to examine the evidence. Look at the fruit of my ministry. This is a simple method all of us can still use today. If a traditional religious practice or doctrine is leading to confusion or harmful consequences, then it should be discarded. Considering these and other seemingly insignificant incidents allows us to glimpse into Jesus' attitudes and thinking patterns. This will help us discover a common sense gospel that can be applied in our modern world.
Our guest today on Good Faith Reads has been Maralene and Miles Wesner, authors of If Jesus Were Here Today. The book, along with more than 100 other titles, is available as both a print book and ebook at